evening. It is approaching 9 p.m. Exactly 8:58 tonight on the 29th of July. Tomorrow, a few things to do in the good old LV. But I just wanted to make a quick note of something. I was at Simpkins Park. Didn't do as much exercising as I would have liked, and before the end of the night, you really have to, before you even get into, your meditative, stepping into those states of true belief that your life can be something of value and importance, and something that you're going to, over the course of the rest of your life, impart on everyone you meet. Before you even do that, here's your duty. It's to get your heart pumping. Because you didn't do it at Simpkins Park. But I just need to make quick note of something, because I was at Simpkins Park. And I noticed that tonight, and this is just after the sunset, and the sky was still still nearing pitch black as the stars came out, and you look up at the sky and they're out. But the night sky had a little bit of that purple from the sun. And I looked down at that stone that was recently laid there for Cassandra Selbach. One that Deanna O'Donnell reported a number of times had been vandalized. And it made me think about something related to the whole news thing that I've been doing a podcast about. This is something we're going to have to talk about. The meaning of memento mori, of course, things related to death, and that term specific now to images of a dead body or a corpse. We know about the daguerreotypes as a former art aspirant. But the big deal here is, we were talking about Hamlet and Shakespeare, and the fact that Hamlet, look at this. This is grasshoppers here. That's what this is. So Hamlet, like many great pieces of literature, that play has a scene where one of the characters holds a skull. And that is a memento mori in that instant, like in Boccaccio, Decameron, right? And the comparison that was made between the two stories. One was humorous; it was a joke about the original, right? Helen of Troy. Well, so there's that whole, from the Greek pantheon, the story of Helen of Troy had this face that could launch 1,000 ships, and it was just the most beautiful, gorgeous face. Helen of Troy, like the epitome of beauty. And much like in Hamlet, where he's holding the skull, in the sort of knockoff parody, he holds the skull, and he says, "This is Helen of Troy. This is the face that could launch 1,000 ships." And he kisses the skull, I believe, if I recall properly. And it was just so moving about that is that it gives us an idea, where do these funerary symbols come from? And we have things, not memento moris, but mementos, that are things like tombstones, or in this case, monuments. Something as simple as a rock, the meaning in that, sure, maybe it's okay, we'll put a rock, we'll put Cassandra Selbach and her 2 kids kissing her, and after all she went through with that illness, and you followed it, right? And it's deeply moving. And 2 things I want to talk about is just the idea of something there to remind you of someone and what they meant to a community, what they meant to the world. In this case, just a rock. And the symbolism in it, maybe there is none, the same way that there just has to be something. Like the tombstone, what's the symbol of a square piece of granite? Of course, we do know that there's a Masonic symbol there, much like the coffin. The fact you can't see in it, we don't, in a sense, we want to shield ourselves from the reality that our bodies will rot, and want to preserve this goes back to memento mori. We want to preserve the image of our loved one before they begin to rot into the ground and turn black. So frozen in that moment, right? In a coffin, which is a, it's a box, but geometrically within that box, and there's a mathematical explanation for it. You should read into it. I don't know if the Freemasonic tradition has anything to offer, but I do recall within that box, death cannot happen. There is no concept of an end or the end of existence. Within that box is only forever. And so the rock, it's interesting to think about because you were always moved so deeply in Hawaii, right there in the Victoria Street area by Ward, downtown. There was a building and there was a art installation, and it was merely two rocks. The art installation was merely two rocks, but it had been engraved in such a way as for these two rocks were facing each other, and the word is anthropomorphized. These rocks were anthropomorphized, right? And it looked like these two rocks, or people in this case. And part of the beauty in the concept was, what is the difference between a rock and a person? What is the difference between a person and a rock? And that was amplified, reverberated by the fact that, Hawaiian culture has a very deep roots in animism. And by its very nature, the personification, at least in the mythology, of the landscape, and especially the biology, in contrast with Celtic animism, plants or what have you. But the concept there was these two rocks, and when you read, Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn, the concept of something being frozen in time, the fact that these are rocks, are they real? Are we real? And they were trying to reach each other. These two rocks trying to kiss, trying to embrace each other in their arms, Is he gonna make a right? Okay, ambulance is good. But these rocks were trying to embrace each other in their arms. And there was something so beautiful. And so it's interesting, maybe the rock is a symbol for something more than just something has to be there for Cassandra Salbach's picture to appear. But in any event, what was interesting, I think, the big takeaway here is that, Cassandra Salbach's picture, you saw pieces of tape over it. And for a long time, it was chipped. It was defaced. And someone today, because it wasn't this way yesterday, must have gone there, reinstalled a new picture, and affixed it. Affixed it to the rock. I don't know why it means something. I don't know if it should mean something. That's where we get into our next point, but it did mean something. For some reason I saw that, and you have to believe. You have to believe that some of the things you see reflect and are signs. Right here, for all it means and for all it doesn't mean, for all it should mean, for all it shouldn't mean to us. This was a person important to the community, and someone came in, fixed it. Perhaps not more than an hour or two before I saw it. And this was right as the sky was purple, before the sun fully set and these stars came out. And I must have seen it for a reason. It's a weird thing, because I looked at it, and knowing the story, I would look at that rock even in the picture being in a chipped state and it having been defaced, I look at it and it would bring tears to my eyes, you know. And I don't think in any way that is histrionic, drama queen, because there are certain symbols that, you know, people died before we were even born, and they were so important that they have meaning on a national and worldwide level to us. And there are a few lesser known ones that I find deeply moving. As strong conservative man as I am, as much as I love money and whores and bitches and hoes to fuck, that the Jerry Saviano in me comes back, and I just start to see the world through that sissy lens. And and one of them that I think people need to be more aware of is the Franklin Delano Roosevelt statue. And it is, to my knowledge, the only statue of the former president, him in a wheelchair. And there were numerous movies, one of them being the total drama queen work of art with Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, Pearl Harbor, where the president was depicted that way. And there was a biography written about him by a very prominent presidential biographer. I don't recall his name. I don't think it was Mitchum or that other guy that we're familiar with, but you know, and there was a line in there where he talked about Roosevelt standing up from his wheelchair in those few times he could, stricken with polio for most of his adult life, and they hid that from us so he could get elected. Here's the president, a disabled president. Little do most people know. And he stood from his wheelchair to lift a nation from its knees. And there are reasons why this is coming back to me, and why these ideas are starting to piece themselves back together. There are many reasons. And so, you know, the next point is why, you know, should we be reflective on these things? I hate symbols. George Carlin says himself, I leave symbols to the symbol-minded, and it makes sense. Because as much as you can logically understand veneration of law enforcement, military, authority figures, and business figures, and sports professionals, which you really don't understand, okay? And you can understand why people are deluded. You know, you just, the veneration of it. You are fully aware, Matthew, you know, but you cannot process the veneration of these symbols in a certain way, you know, and you know that certain symbols have hypnotic effect, power, like, you know, the official logos of the Navy, the Army, you know, and the corporate logos with the Army, with the Army Strong Star and all of that stuff. You know, you can understand the hero mythology that's been rooted into it and all of it, but you know also that there is a lot of danger in it, because it has a, you know, and for instance with national security, with police, with national surveillance, you know, the way that the public has been completely deluded by big brothers here to help us, the the way the public has been completely brainwashed into we give up our freedoms. And you look at KPVM News 25, and all you see is now the police wiretapped this guy. The police read this guy's text messages, and that's how they caught him. And then we're talking Nye County Sheriff's Office. And I don't agree with that. Because the level of criminal that they're catching are like, low-level narco, drug dealer, or someone that committed some kind of theft, or someone that was harboring a criminal, wanted for low-level larceny, blah, blah, blah. I don't like it. But the symbols, the National Security Administration, the FBI, the symbol of the Nye County Sheriff's Office, have come to embody a feeling of, well, they're here to protect us, and you know what, I have to be afraid of them, and that's what they want. And when you start to realize that they're enforcing laws that maybe shouldn't even be on the books, I've said this for a long time, it's like, that's fucked up. They shouldn't have the power to do that. We should tie their hands to some extent. And so that's why symbols have incredible power over us and are the symbol of our enslavement in some cases. But on this night, it had nothing to do with that. That's just it's not conjecture, it's real. It had nothing to do with that. It was about how should we value an image of someone that we don't know, that we never met, that died sometimes, in some cases, like in the case of FDR, before we were even born. Should we value that in any way? And there's a strong case for no. Because we have our own personal gods, and you can call these gods. I think we have our own personal gods that should be elevated to the same stature in our mind. Should be considered just as important, if not more, than these national, worldwide symbols of peace or whatever. Right? Because they just should be more important, especially as a conservative, in the sense that I understand the value of the family unit and parents and the existence of family and the charities like the ones that exist here in Pahrump should rightfully be seen as more effective and be given, and you know what, yes, the churches, unfortunately, as atheistic and anti-Jesus as I am, so that's the way I look at things. What are you gonna do about it? So my answer to that is, I guess there could be value, given the way society is, in viewing a widely held symbol as your personal god, the way that all of society does, as conforming as it is, as traditional as it is. And the value in it can be just because, well, everyone else is too, and there's no harm in it. But the value in it can also be that in this instance, there is an artistic, dare I say, literary value to the adoption of that symbol into your own personal life. And that comes the way you would talk about, you were interested in Mr. Rogers, you would read Velveteen Rabbit. You only read that about 5 years ago when you became obsessed with it because of its mythic power. And you studied the Velveteen Rabbit as a very unique kind of fairy tale. Help the bunny that helped the little boy to become real. Right? And the structure of the myth there. And also you studied ambiguity, right, as a tool for the writer. you can read into it in a way where the boy died from his flu or his scarlet fever. And yet you can read into it where, no, he did survive, he did live, he did recover. But the bunny did not. And the beauty in that is that, well, the bunny was never alive. And so that's, you studied it on those grounds. So perhaps if someone lacks quality parents, if someone lacks, in the traditional foundations that a family should give a child, perhaps, as conforming as it is and out of alignment with just based on the literary power of a teary-eyed 28, 29, 30-year-old adult that's still trying to grow up, and in a way, aren't we all? And that in itself has a literary power to it. There is extreme power in that idea. So that's all I have to say tonight, because we're going to start doing our podcast again on the news. It's going to be episode 3 of Remixing Real News. And this idea is incredibly important as part of it. So something to keep in mind. Because as we lay out a foundation for how potentially the best postmodern cavalcade healing instrument type of newscast can be produced, one aspect to theorize about is if we're going to reshape, if we're going to adopt the position that our role is in part to reshape existing values using our storytelling skills, then what exactly is the model we're trying to bring to things? Exactly what negotiation are we trying to do? Exactly what Overton window are we trying to open up, and in what and in how many directions? And why is the way we view memento moris, funeral ceremonies, certain statues, the existence of certain national and worldwide or regional, in the case of that monument to Cassandra Selbach, certain symbols, personal gods, dare I say, national, icons. How do we view it, and where does that fit on such a revolutionary type of stage for journalism and storytelling? So that's all I got for tonight. But let's go run around a bit, get the heart moving, and get a little happy.